Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on October 10th, Friday, 2014 at about 9:15 in the afternoon. No. East Trooper. 9:10 in the morning Eastern Daylight Time. And I want to continue with this October autobiography sequence and in all likelihood draw it to a close today. As you may have gathered, I was in, some people said, what's your major? There's people say I'm a pre-med major. Well, there's no such major as pre-med, at least at Ohio State. And I majored in history. But interestingly enough, I graduated with almost as many course hours in various chemistry, courses, than I did with my history, my actual major subject. We did have to take the initial, the freshman, the three freshman courses, and then, if you wanted to go to medical school, you'd take organic chemistry, and that was actually a series of four 3-hour courses. 2 of those 3-hour courses were lectures, and 2 of the 3-hour courses were laboratory work. The only elective chemistry stuff I took was I took 2 courses in quantitative analysis. And I did that basically because it was just so much fun. The laboratory stuff in quantitative analysis is just tremendous fun. But finished up, did the organics in fall of '71 and then winter of '72. And the last day of lab in, let's see, get the reflection off. The last day of the lab in organic of fall, this was in sort of early, mid-December of 1971, the 5 students that were sort of the stalwarts of the class, and then the instructor who's right there, the guy with, well, I can't say the guy with the beard because there's 3 people with beards in that picture. Here, let's try this. This is, well, in any case, obviously I'm down in front here. This woman was from the North Columbus area, and her dad was an osteopath. I tell you, I can't remember. I remember her, but I can't tell you anything about her. And then you've got the instructor in the back, and then in the center in the back row is a fellow named Keith. And he and the fellow next to him were from the same hometown up near Akron. And I met this fellow here, who was my best friend in at Ohio State. I met him actually during freshman orientation, and it's one of these things where you just hit it off. I mean, you finish each other's sentences. You think alike. Oh, it was great. And he's now an internist up in Ithaca, New York. But, the organic labs were fun. You had to do a product. You had to turn out a product or, get a yield on a certain, you do a reaction and see what the yield was. And you had to test the purity of boiling points and so forth. But you dissolved a lot of this stuff in ether. Diethyl ether, and of course diethyl ether has a tremendously high vapor pressure, and and you're supposed to crystallize this stuff out of ether. A lot, that's several. That's one of several methods that you used, and of course one of the major no-nos was to boil, this stuff, getting ether over an open flame. Nonetheless, some of the more adventurous souls would try to get this ether to go away faster over an open flame, which, given the ether vapor is heavier than air and sinks down, meaning it's going to go over the top of that beaker or whatever, go down and get to the Bunsen burner. Ether burns. It does, contrary to popular opinion, it does not explode, but it's very flammable. You're supposed to do it over a water bath. Well, heck, if you did that, you wouldn't have time to get all the work done. You'd roll out of those labs, and for those people who have indulged in glue sniffing, and who were puffheads in junior high school, that's exactly how you felt. Well, I can imagine they felt. I'm surprised I had any liver function left after I came out of that building. Interesting, another guy that was not in that picture I showed you was a fellow I had met at Boise State, who is now a neurosurgeon, and he was one of these big, tall guy, had a big afro, which I'm surprised didn't catch fire in that lab with all the Bunsen burners going on, and he'd come over to me and stand right up against me and say, "Hey, Kersey, how much product you get?" He was a lot of fun. I met, as I said, and he was he? I think, yeah, no, he wasn't at orientation. I didn't meet him at orientation. Actually, the other guy I roomed with at Boise State was at orientation, so he's now dead. He too was a general practitioner up in Northwest Ohio. The grim certainty looms for us all. The great certainty, as Tom Sharp would say, the great certainty looms. Well, anyway, that pretty much gets me done with chemistry, because I wanted to really spend the day telling you about my history courses, seeing as how that was my major. Now, one of the problems with scheduling courses in my major was I had to schedule all these things around the laboratory work, for the chemistry laboratory work, and my teaching in the 120, 1, 2, and 3 sequence when I did those 2 years of lab instructing. And so as a result, I might have wanted to take it, any number of courses, but I couldn't because there was the time conflict. So I ended up with a somewhat different looking major than I had intended when I started out. But nonetheless, it was all very interesting and fun. And the fellow that, the 121, 122, and 123 sequence in history, I was very excited to do this, because I just love history, and did and do. And I remember, I was very interested, to walk into a classroom, and the first thing this instructor does is he lights up a cigarette. That's when you could smoke in classrooms then at Ohio State. You can't now. You can't. I don't even think you can smoke on campus openly. I don't know. The health Nazis are everywhere, but he wouldn't just pull one out and flick open the lighter and light up. he'd hold the pack for a while, and then he'd tap it around a bit, and then he'd finally pull this cigarette out, and then he'd twirl that in his fingers for a while, and then finally, with about 7 or 8 minutes left to go in the lecture, he would get around to lighting this thing, and he'd walk back, forth while he did it. I he was he gave a series of very good lectures, and I think I wrote my very first paper on the English common law, the start of the English common law, and I was very actually there were two papers. We had to do two papers, and then the second one was on shipbuilding technology in the 1400s and how that contributed to European dominance, or the start of European dominance. It's not a particularly original thought, but the second one, which was, in theory was 19th century, although that quarter got cut short because of the riots, was actually taught by a woman named Helen Wineland, who became a very good friend. Actually, the next, she and the fellow I'll tell you about later became, we socialized together. I kept socializing with them when I was in medical school till they left. They left Ohio State. See, they were PhD candidates working on their dissertation, and they were hired under a no tenure contract, and they were like on 3 or 4 year contract. Excuse me, while they finished their PhD. I think Helen was getting hers from Indiana University. And she'd been working on it for 7 years. Now, it turns out she never did finish that dissertation. And so she never got her PhD. I don't know where she ended up. I suppose I'll have to Google her or something. She was good. Well, all these people were good. Now, when I met Jeff Williams for 123, I took that course actually in the summer of 1970. Yeah, summer of 1970. I worked on the parent orientation program that summer, and I took 10 hours. I took the History 123, and I took some a 5-hour biology course. The pay was such that it covered the tuition, and you worked about, I think about 20 hours a week on this orientation stuff, and about that. And you had to, patrol the building, at night, make sure all the doors were locked that should be locked, and open that should be open, and you had a master key to the entire Lincoln Tower. The students stayed in Morrill Tower, and the parents stayed in Lincoln Tower. And you had panel discussions at night, and I, did bus tours and walking tours during the day, and so it's a good job. $5 an hour in 1970, guys. That's like $20 an hour today. Good job. Fun job, and but that's neither here nor there, because I had Jeff Williams for History 123, and you never know who you're going to run into summer quarter. I mean, you never know the kind of students that are going to be in a class summer quarter generally, at least in the introductory, freshman year level classes. Well, it turns out this group, and there were about 17 in the class, was a fairly, let's say about 14 or 13 or 14 of us were fairly non-talkative, and then there were 3 or 4 that basically drove the discussions and so forth. He came in one morning, and he said, "Well, my wife just had our first child. We had a son," and then he starts into saying what he wants to say, and then he asks a question, and he goes like, "Shh, dead silence, dead silence," and I would have popped my hand up, but that can be very tiresome for the rest of this class if one person does that a lot. So after about 3 minutes of just standing there staring at us, he just packs all his stuff into his briefcase and walks out the door. That was a lot of fun. Anyway, I got to know him as a personal friend. I actually ended up babysitting this child. I'd go over to their apartment for dinner. Later on, he and his wife and my parents became very good friends. When he got a job and moved down to northern Kentucky, and they'd visit back and forth. Great people. And then, interestingly enough, this may have been winter or spring quarter of 1971. That's spring quarter of 1971. Ohio State started their very first women's history course. And it was women's history. It wasn't women's studies, where they now have a department of women's studies, but it was women's history. And it was taught by Helen Wineland, the one that had taught 122, the second course, and a woman named Mary Young, who was a full professor, and who also smoked quite heavily and readily during class. And there were about 30 people in this class, 3 of whom were men. So whenever I get ragged on for being, a misogynist, anti-feminist, I just tell people, I was in the very first women's, history course taught at Ohio State University. And that's true, I was. It was a good course. Mary Young was especially good. She went on to become chairman, I think, at Cornell. And then I took a history of science, two 5-hour history of science courses with a woman named June Fulmer. And June Fulmer, now unfortunately dead, also one of the great smokers. And she pulled an interesting stunt, and she did it both quarters. Second quarter, I was on to her, because I knew what she was doing. What she would do is she handed out this reading list that had like 35 or 40 books on it, and the paper, the list gave any indication of being, this was, we're going to read 35 or 40 books this quarter for this course. Well, actually, normally, if you're taking 3 5-hour history courses, 15 hours of 600 level, this was a 600 level course. History courses, you're going to end the course of a quarter read about 32 books anyway. But generally not for one course. So the first day, First class meeting, we had like about 32, 33 people in the classroom. Next class meeting, we were down to about 14. The class meeting after that, we were down to about 7. And she says, well, now that I've thinned the crowd down, here's the real reading list. Which had about 7 or 8 books on it, but that's manageable. You can do that. I always thought that was great. And then all the history majors were required to take a historiography course, 301. And it was taught by a fellow named John Rule, who actually I later had for a subsequent 600 level course on France. Particularly the religious wars in 16th and 17th century France. But he taught this historiography course, and it was a night course. It was like 3 hours on Wednesday night. It was like, I don't know, 7 to 10 or 7:30 to 10:30. And but it was interesting because that sort of got me into the philosophy of history and the writing of history. Is history objective and that sort of stuff. Which led me to take it was called independent study, but it was a seminar. It was a graduate level seminar with Clayton Roberts, who was at that time, he was one of the world's experts in Tudor and Stuart England. Greatly beloved, by its students. Incredible lecturer. But this was a seminar setting, and so you had obviously set readings to do, and then you had each week, and the class met for 3 hours once a week. And there were about 12 or 13 people in this seminar. Excuse me. I think 3 or 4 of us were undergraduates, and the rest were graduate students, and you had to write a 10 or 12 page paper each week about, with some idea, developing some idea or point in the readings, or your attitude, your thoughts about it, and that sort of thing. So you had to argue your point and so forth. And you'd go into the room, and basically, you had a hat full of numbers, and you'd take a number. And then Dr. Roberts he had a box with identical numbers, but it was a different box. And so he'd reach in his box and he'd plot a number. And the number of the person, when the person whose number matched his, then read their paper aloud to the assembled multitude, and then prepared to be mercilessly grilled. Now, if once you had done that, you didn't have to take a number. I mean, so it's like, so basically 10 of us, 10 out of 14 got to do this, and then got to submit to it. Yeah, that was a very harsh 3 hours for me, but very worthwhile, very worthwhile. And I also took his Tudor and Stuart England course, which actually was the very last history course I took at Ohio State, and it was, well, let's say it was scheduled just, the building where it was held was at the farthest point from the building, from which I had to go to that building. And it got to the point that I couldn't really make it on time. I would, there's no way I'm going to walk down into this man's lecture hall late. So I just started blowing off the last 5 or 10 minutes of uh, the place where the course I was taking in the other building, because I wasn't gonna do that to this guy or myself for that matter. Interestingly enough, I don't know how it is with most universities, but at Ohio State, if you were a graduating senior, you did not have to take finals. You didn't take finals. And I wasn't a graduating senior, but I was going to enter medical school in the next, about 6 weeks from then. And I went down and explained my situation to him, and I said, would you consider me a graduating senior? Well, he knew me from this seminar, and he said, well, are you willing to take the grade on the 2 midterms? Now, we had just taken a final, midterm about a week before, and we hadn't gotten those grades back. And I didn't know. So I thought, just gotta know. He says, I gotta know. I said, yeah. Okay. Well, I did okay. I mean, but that was always, I thought, ooh. So that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed my my history. If I had stayed and done a fourth year before I started medical school, I would have basically just taken I would have done 15 hours, 3 5-hour courses each quarter, 45 hours, 600 level history. But I didn't get to do that. But nonetheless, I've basically read history pretty much every day or in large chunks since then. So I think I've pretty much covered the things that I would have taken anyway. But it's not quite the same thing as having somebody who really knows what they're talking about talk to you. It really isn't. So I did enjoy those 3 years. Yeah, best time of my life. Well, that's not quite true. This is the best time of my life right now. Alrighty, so on that note, this is the end of the October Autobiography series. And if something else comes to mind here in the next couple of months about some other related topic that I can string out for a while, I'll do that. So on that note, bye-bye, YouTubers.